Hey, it's Jen with Mad Prepping, and today we're very honored to have Dr. William Forstchen, New York Times bestselling author of One Second After, and many other books, including his latest, A Final Day. We're extremely honored to have him with us. Dr. Forstchen, welcome to Mad Prepping.
Pleasure being with you on this snowy day up here in the mountains of North Carolina.
Yes, getting your first snow in there, are you?
Yeah.
So I know you've been working with EMP and whatnot for a very long time. And of course, everybody has read and loved your One Second After. But with everything going on in North Korea, what are your thoughts? What do you think people need to be doing, researching, educating?
How long do we have? 2 or 3 hours?
The long you want.
This is as serious as a heart attack at this moment. So much has unfolded in this year, 2017. You know, when I first wrote the book, actually I started working on it back in 2005, the first of the 3 books on EMP titled One Second After. At that point, North Korea was starting to move towards deliverable nuclear capability, but we kept kicking the can down the road. Yeah. It's going to be years away. It will be years away. Look what's unfolded in the last 12 months. Possible thermonuclear detonation, definite testing of ICBMs, Defense Intelligence Agency completely revising its figures about 4 or 5 months ago, that they might have upwards of 60 warheads. These are fully capable of delivering an EMP strike. This is dead on serious. We can't kick the can down the road any further.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I know he keeps doing all sorts of vertical launch testing, and he's basically ignoring what the UN is telling him to do. And I think that we're probably at a precipice right now where people really need to start being concerned and paying attention to this, because this little brat is just about to light everybody's world up, or actually not light it up. He's about to turn the lights off.
Yeah. Okay, I'm giving my age away. I'm in my 60s, but I try not to act it. I grew up just outside of New York City during the Cold War, where I can even recall the Cuban Missile crisis.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island.
At that time, the paradigm was referred to as MAD, mutual assured destruction, meaning that in the event that we and the Soviets went to war, nobody's going to win. No matter how hard you hit us, enough of our nuclear weapon capability will be left over to strike back, annihilate you. It's a no-win proposition. When you're dealing with a stable government, that's very logical, it's understandable, and on the sidelines, we can both talk to each other and say, look, this is all insanity, let's not do it. We are not dealing with 2 highly erratic, unstable regimes. One that definitely has nuclear weapons, North Korea. The other one, Iran, that swears it's going to get them. MAD might not work with them. They might be willing to take the damage to inflict a killing blow on the United States, literally in 1 second with an EMP strike.
I know they were able to get missiles over to Hawaii and then California, and I think I've heard that they have capabilities of getting a strike in anywhere in the U.S., but with an EMP, we know that you don't have to get a direct strike. You just go a mile up in the atmosphere and bam.
Right. And that has been a very disturbing thing to see. I'm not going to point a finger and say mainstream media. I mean, I've seen it across the board in so many media sources where it's, well, yeah, they have the lift capability with a ballistic missile to get a nuclear weapon up there, but they don't have precision guidance capability and reentry capability. Therefore, let's not worry yet. But as you've just pointed out, and almost all your listeners know, An EMP is detonated by simply putting a warhead about 250 miles up into space, firing it off, triggers the EMP, you shut down your opponent's power grid, and then the dying starts. So they can do that to us now.
What are your thoughts on China being involved with any or all of this?
I believe that I might just be in opposition to some people on this. Neither Russia or China want to see this turn into a full-scale blowout.
I agree.
Particularly, let's say we strike back at North Korea. Whichever way the wind is blowing, it's going to blanket either South Korea, Japan, Russia, or China with radioactive debris if we are forced to go to a full nuclear capability. It's a no-win situation. Chinese are pragmatic enough that there was such a profound blow against the United States, it will destabilize the global economy, and they're going to get sucked into it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So they're playing kind of a double-edged sword game here. It's sort of like poking the other guy, but you don't want to turn it into a full-scale fist fight.
All right, Bill, so let me ask you this. I know there's a conspiracy theory out there. People are actually saying that there are no nukes. What are your thoughts on that?
Without naming names, I have an in-law who is absolutely convinced the earth is hollow. I put that in the same category.
I thought it was
not to denigrate the intelligence of some people who might believe that.
right.
But I'm not into such conspiracy theories. The evidence is so darn out there in the open with nuclear blasts, the seismic shock waves, defectors coming through. It's real.
Right.
Let's include ourselves.
You're absolutely right. And we don't ever want to alienate people for their beliefs or opinions.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I hear that. I'm like, I don't think so. But, everybody's entitled. And Kim Jong-un, do you think that this is all him? Do you think there's others that could be involved? I know we talk about a lot about the deep state through different Mad Deep shows and whatnot that we do, and through the weekly podcast that we do. What are your thoughts about that?
He's a Stalin in North Korea. He is in charge. Something a lot of folks might not know about how that system runs. Stalin did the same thing. Anybody makes a move against him, the entire family at the second cousins might very well be on the block as well. Now, I have a couple of long-lost nephews I have not seen in almost 20 years. So imagine you and I are talking right now, and one of them goes berserk and does something, and there's a knock on my door later in the day, and they take me away, along with my daughter. Yeah. That system of terror is very, very effective at keeping power. And we've heard and we've seen news items about the executions he's triggered, including his own half-brother, various people in the state. In fact, executing people by mortar fire or anti-aircraft guns.
Wow.
This is a terror state, and he is in charge. Have you seen North Korean bling?
No.
Okay. I urge listeners to check it out. Just Google up North Korean generals bling. Our military, the military across the last couple hundred years, a man, a woman earns a military decoration. They wear it proudly, usually on the left side, all right? And we'll see one of our Joint Chiefs of Staff has 4 or 5 rows of ribbons. The North Korean generals, they have their metal bling all the way down to the hem of their jacket with about 70 or 80 medals on it. It's bizarre. It's bizarre. It's this might sound a bit crude, but they got more bling on them than a Las Vegas hooker.
Well, we are dealing with some pretty misogynistic, twisted, evil.
Yeah. This is a very twisted society.
It truly is. Oh my gosh. Well, and I know, like I said, everybody has read and loved 1 Second After. And where did you base your research on going through with this and get started with it? And it's just such a phenomenal book.
That's going to be a long answer. I'm going to have to run it for 5 minutes.
That's fine. You run
it's
whatever.
A bit of a tale. 2004, July 2004, I'm in Washington, D.C. to meet with Newt Gingrich.
Mhm.
Now, I hope that doesn't upset some folks. I mean, there's a lot of feeling about Newt on one side and the other. Newt is a good friend of mine.
Well,
We
and
were, we were working on a book on the Civil War at that time. I was up in D.C. to conference with him for a couple of days about this book on the Civil War. Where we're meeting, he's pretty upset, throws his attache case onto a table. He has excellent control of his language in both private and public, but he kind of blew a bit. And it was like, when is Congress going to wake up over EMP? I look at him, I go, you mean electromagnetic pulse weapons? He's like, how the heck do you know about that? I said, well, Newt, I did minor in military technology and the history of technology. What had happened that day, by coincidence, was the day the congressional report on the threat of EMP was released. Bipartisan committee, the 2004 report, which any of your listeners can look up. Just Google up congressional report EMP 2004. What had happened on that day was that on the same day the committee was releasing that report, at the other end of Capitol Hill, another committee was releasing the report on 9/11. Where do you think all of the media was that day?
of course, 9/11.
Right.
Yes.
We were looking, as I've often said, we were looking backwards to the last war
Mhm.
rather than looking forward to the potential of another one.
Mhm.
Nobody paid attention. It was like, imagine a report being dropped into the forest and nobody is there. Does
Mhm.
it exist?
Exactly.
We spent
Uh,
hours talking about it. He was venting, I was soaking things up, and then he turns the coin over a bit, looking at me and goes, why don't you write a book about it? Following day, I'm on Capitol Hill. I meet with Congressman Roscoe Bartlett, who chaired the committee. Same challenge from him. As he put it, Bill, there's no constituency, there's no public knowledge. It sounds like sci-fi. Maybe a book about this is needed. Okay, I said, I'll do it. The day after I got back from Washington, I sat down and I was like, okay, let's start doing some research. How am I going to write this book? What unfolded was, I'll mention the research in a couple of minutes because there's some very personal stories in that book. For about a year, I was caught in a trap. I was thinking Tom Clancy type story. I'll have my typical hero. The bad guys have the 3 weapons. Maybe Harrison Ford, if he's still young enough, will play the character. And it was a dead end. And then there was the gestalt, the moment I really say God tapped me on the side of the head. I teach at Monterey College, which is a small Christian college, up here in the mountains of North Carolina. 500 kids. It's a very close, intimate environment. On graduation day, it's kind of emotional for many of us. I've worked with these kids for 4 years. I call them my kids.
mhm.
And I'm sitting through an incredibly boring graduation speaker. I just wish graduation speakers had an egg timer, 10 minutes, ding, sit down. This person is going on, and I have one more advice to give to you, kids. And we're all sitting there going, oh, please, it's 90 degrees. I'm wearing my doctoral robes, which are hot and heavy. I sometimes tell people I got the PhD simply because I have robe envy. And it was just, I was melting, and then wham, it hit. I'm looking at the kids in the audience. I'm looking at their parents. I'm looking at my co-professors and friends, people of the community. And it was like, my God, write the book about us.
Oh
Set
gosh.
here in my school, in my town, make it real, make it personal.
Mhm.
Got back home, pulled off the robes, ordered pizza, locked myself in my office, and I started to write.
Wow.
Now, I'd already been doing some of the research, and then things really start to frightfully connect as I was working on this book. I go to interview my pharmacist. If you want to know the person who really knows everything about a town, ask the pharmacist, even more than your family doctor, because she's filling the prescriptions. She knows everything. And I'm asking her, what happens? Now, remember, with a pharmacy, It's not like the old days with the big room and all the stuff in the back and the guy would mix it himself.
Yeah, the mortar and pestle and yeah.
Yeah. You walk in, you give your order, they punch it in, it goes into the computer. 2 days later, a replacement arrives by FedEx. Particularly when it comes to controlled substances, they keep very little there. She actually broke down in tears when I'm presenting this scenario of what happens if the grid goes down perhaps for months, maybe years. And she's like, my God, Bill, you have no idea how many people in this town will be dead within a month or want to die within
Right.
a pain medications, things like that. I go to the nursing home where my father is, and I'm looking around there.
Hmm.
And an incident happened actually just prior to this gestalt, some months earlier. We had 2 hurricanes crisscross up here in the mountains of North Carolina. That was back in '04.
Right.
My
Francis
father
and Ivan, I
was, yeah, my father was in a nursing home, tough old cavalry trooper from World War II, fighting out the last months of his life. The grid, the power grid up here in the mountains blew out for several days. I get a call from the nursing home. They're shorthanded, half the staff can't get there. They need help. Come up and help us. So I'm sitting there in emergency lighting at 1 a.m, and I'm talking with some of the staff, and I'm going, this is really kind of scary in a way. You know, this book is jingling in the back of my head. I haven't put it together yet. And I asked them, what happens if even the emergency lighting's gone and there's no outside help? What happens to my father on a respirator?
Mm.
Well, we got bottled air. What happens when that runs out? Squeeze ball with a mask. So when I get tired and I can't squeeze anymore, I stop and I watch my father die.
Mm.
What happens to my father's pain medication if it's not delivered after 3 or 4 days?
Yeah.
These things
Wow.
start. I'm getting emotional right now just thinking about it, remembering my father lying there and worrying about these things.
Hmm.
I started interviewing police, fire, military, law enforcement, and I interviewed a heck of a lot of people, and the scenario kept coming up the same. It will be a nightmare unlike anything we have ever imagined before. So that's the origin of the book. I
Wow.
want to convey a real message of what would happen in a somewhat typical small town.
Hmm.
It could be here, it could be in New York, Maine, Oregon, Kansas. The only difference is this particular town has certain tactical advantages because it's up in the mountains, but it's basically the same. The figures
Exactly.
are about 90% of Americans would perish within a year. Those figures are valid.
And that's based on.
Okay, why 90%? That always shocks a lot of people,
Mhm.
particularly if they're not familiar with the issue. Let's start, okay, we have oxygen, we'll have that, but let's go to the next thing necessary. Food, water. Let's start with water. 3 days without water, you're dying. Well, where does the water come from that went right into this coffee cup and yours only minutes ago? It's pumped. It goes through filtration. What happens to the sewerage? In other words, within a couple of days, not only are we out of water, but we're out of sanitary, getting rid of whatever it is, which
Hmm.
starts polluting the streams. Within 3 to 5 to 7 days, significant gastrointestinal illness will be hitting an awful lot of people. Without modern medication, some of them are going to start dying rather quickly. No food. Average community has 20 to 25 days worth of food on hand, starting from what's in your fridge and pantry to the truck that's backing up to the supermarket. That goes. And beyond that, no refrigeration.
Right.
So within a matter of, usually if a store loses complete power for, I think it's less than a day, all the meat, everything in the freezer is condemned and thrown out. You lose that. You lose command and control. You lose security. You lose transportation. You lose communication. All these things start cascading. And then suddenly 90% fatality rate looks very realistic. You know, is that not a temptation to a psychotic ruler armed with nuclear weapons?
Absolutely. And plus, when
Yeah.
you're looking at high dense populations such
Oh,
as New York, even Greenville, they have got so many people down in Greenville, South Carolina per capita.
mhm.
When you start looking at scenarios like that, I mean, it's going to be like I'm trying to remember the movie, on the island and Lord of the Flies.
Or the
Yes,
flaw.
yes, that's exactly what society will turn into. Plus,
Yes.
you've got the people that aren't getting their medications, that people that are taking the anti-anxiety, the what is it, the psychotropic drugs and whatnot.
Yeah, my pharmacist, she alerted me to that. I didn't even think about it at first. When she pointed out, she said about 1% of the folks in this town who you don't know, but I do, are on serious medication for profoundly neurotic and even psychotic situations, which 100 years ago, they were quietly put away.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, about 1/4 of the nation at any given time is on some sort of anxiety reliever or antidepressant. Shut all that off. You're going to have a lot of psychotic behavior rather quickly,
Mm-hmm.
not just from people who were psychotic before, but the rest of us getting driven psychotic now by this
Exactly.
disease.
You're under a lot of pressure, and
Yeah,
even a sane person is going to start going through that, much less somebody that's in it, or
yeah,
someone who doesn't have their heart medication or
right,
things that they need to live on.
right.
So,
So all of these, Dr. Peter Pry, who sat on the commission, did the report in '04 and '08, who I really see as one of the godfathers of this issue. I have deep respect for Dr. Pry. Um, in the report, Dr. Pry was quoted as saying it would be the equivalent of throwing America back to 1870.
mhm.
The first time I met Dr. Pry, I said, of all the things you've said, that's maybe the only one I disagree with. He said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, I'm a historian. I actually specialize in the Civil War and some other things. The people of 1870, of course, knew how to live in 1870.
Mhm.
They lived in that environment. They grew up with it. We don't.
Mhm.
We are clueless as to some of the most fundamental things of survival.
Mhm. People
For
can't even
example,
read maps anymore. I mean, they
right,
type it into the GPS, and people cannot read a map. And plus, we're so spoiled. We're so used to hitting a button and boom, Amazon has it on our doorstep in 2
yeah.
days.
If you look at photographs of any city from 1870, the maximum height of almost all buildings is 5 stories. Why? There were no elevators.
Oh,
Old
that's
Mr.
true.
Otis,
Uh-huh.
Old Mr. Otis, I think, had just first developed the first steam-powered elevators. All of those 20, 30, 40-story high apartment complexes and condos,
Mhm.
unlivable. So my response to Dr. Pry was, sir, it ain't going to be 1870. It'll be like we're thrown back 1,000 years in the
Mhm.
chaos of a collapse of an empire.
Wow. That is just amazing.
So other than that, I'll ask you now, how's your day going? you know,
Well, on a brighter note,
on a brighter note,
gosh, yeah.
I
Where's
need a
that
little bit of
coffee mug
hope for
again,
a second
Bill?
after that one.
Where's your pessimistic coffee mug?
The cup is half empty.
There you go. There you go. Wow. Well, Bill, would you mind giving the audience a brief synopsis of 1 Second After?
1 second after. Set in a real place, Black Mountain, North Carolina, and the college I teach at, On Tree College. Starts off your typical day. My main character is a history professor, and let me add, that's about the only autobiographical aspect.
Mm-hmm.
That, and he's a single father,
Mm-hmm.
and he has 2 daughters. I have one daughter who, thank God, is very healthy and full grown now. We get hit by an EMP. What then starts happening day by day by day in that community as my main character, and he is the soul, what in writing we call POV. We see the entire story through his eyes. What starts to happen in that town within a matter of days as reality begins to set in that they're pretty well cut off, communications are down, and how are you going to feed this entire community, maybe for months, with only a very limited food supply on hand? Next problem, what happens when thousands of refugees start coming on along Interstate 40? Because there will be waves of refugees coming out of cities, which are even more unlivable, with this fantasy that out in the countryside or up in the mountains, everything will be fine. It's all Andy Griffin
Go to the
land.
mountains. It's all good.
Yeah, we'll go to the mountains. It's Andy Griffin land, and all will be cool, and we'll all eat granola together. Actually, one critic of the book cracked me up. I doubt if she's listening. She actually said, I got it all wrong. All you had to do was plant a lot of kale. And I'm just like, where are you going to get the seeds?
Mm-hmm.
Where are you going to get the seeds? I mean, it's
Where are you
fundamental
gonna get the
things like that. Yeah.
And then where are you going to get your protein?
And how are you going to protect that when you got a lot of hungry people trampling through your land going, oh my gosh, I love kale, which I think is weird in and of itself. Well, I'm trying to lighten things up slightly. The novel covers 1 year, exactly 1 year, from the time we were hit by an EMP until only a relatively small percentage of the community has survived. More than many other communities because they band together and organize.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a year of hell. And one of the major plot points is that my main character, his daughter, is a type 1 diabetic.
Mm.
And the hell he is going through trying to keep her alive. And I threw in a little subplot that I found hit a lot of people. They have 2 dogs.
Mm-hmm.
What happens to your, and what inspired me to write that was, as I was writing the book,
Mm-hmm.
I had 2 beautiful golden retrievers. They're gone now. If I talk about them for more than 30 seconds, I'll start crying. I miss them. I have a new little puppy here, but gosh, I love those Goldens. We don't even think about that. What happens in a big emergency to your beloved companions?
Absolutely. And that's where I will throw in a little food storage tip, because we have a 7-pound Chihuahua, and I can take one of his 15-pound bags of food, break it down into 15 quart-sized jars, and I know each quart lasts him 10 days.
Right.
So therefore, those 15 jars are 150 days worth of food. I usually keep 2 bags going, and I also talk to our vet, and you can cut their dog food with cooked white rice.
Yes.
Lengthen that. So essentially, Reese has 2 years worth of food that's good for him at any time. So these are other things that we have to remember, not just our 2-legged, but our 4-legged babies. So good point.
I've had more than one person start talking to me about the book, and they mention that, and they break down crying.
Mm-hmm.
I understand. I mean, we love that, particularly for many folks who are older or childless. That dog becomes a very important part of their life.
Absolutely.
What inspired that, in part, was as I said, one of them was lying by my feet as I was writing the book. I looked down at her, and I broke down in tears. I was like, what happens to her? So I put her in. Part of that, a very dear friend of mine, who sort of parenthetically is in the book in one scene, D-Day vet, Omaha Beach, who just sadly passed away last year. I remember him commenting once that he said, as they pushed into Germany, particularly in the cities, there were no dogs.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. And why do you think that?
They were poached, eaten, starved.
Yeah.
As Germany went into total collapse in the last several months of the war, and then immediately thereafter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, people don't think just how primal this is going to turn.
Yes.
And watching the collapse. And that's one thing I loved with your book, is it showed the societal collapse of what happens in a long-term disaster such as this. And it's amazing to see what happens with society. So just wow. And I've got to tell our listeners, if you have not read 1 Second After, and the follow-up books that Bill's written as well, they are just amazing. And what have you and your family personally done to prepare for an EMP scenario, Bill?
That's classified.
Okay. Well,
let's just say we're well prepared.
Good.
I practice what I preach.
That's
and
good.
Writing the book is what turned me on to being a prepper.
Hmm.
I was not beforehand. And then starting to attend conferences and talking with people, I learned a lot. So I try to apply what I learned into my own life.
That's good. And what's the general reaction that you get from people when you talk to them about this? If they've not read the book and come to you, just in general conversation.
You know, when the book started, there was no anticipation on my part or my publisher's part that this was going to turn into a New York Times bestseller.
Hmm.
You know, the initial print run sold out in a day,
Yeah.
in part because of a publicist who linked me into a couple of nationwide interviews.
Hmm.
And then the whole thing just cascaded. Suddenly, reprints, reprints, reprints. I'm doing conferences. And the initial response, best explained by an interview I did with a radio station in Phoenix. The interviewer was basically saying, "Boy, you are wearing a tinfoil hat today, aren't you?" We go to a commercial break. The weather guide comes on. Another typical day in Phoenix. High today of 107, low tonight of 95. Tomorrow's forecast is going to go. So we come back on, and I'm like, let me present for your consideration, as Rod Serling used to say in The Twilight Zone. Phoenix with no electricity just for 7 days. How many people will die? And that shook him. I said, given the high percentage of retirees living there in homes designed not the way they were designed 100 years ago to work and stay somewhat cool,
Right.
but you turn that AC off.
Hmm.
And he was like, oh my God. And I said, by the way, where's Phoenix get its water?
Oh, yeah, that's important.
Yeah. So in the beginning, there was a lot of tinfoil hat reaction.
Hmm.
That stopped. And what's been very gratifying in one sense is a lot of interviews now, I don't even have to explain what EMP is. They already know.
Hmm.
The person interviewing me says, well, our listeners, and just like with you, folks know I don't have to get into the physics of it, how it happens, why, etc. People are aware of it. It's in the lexicon. Even Wall Street Journal, even the Washington Post and others, it's discussed there.
Hmm.
So there's been a profound change across the years since the book came out in 2009.
Well, and something else I meant to bring up when we were talking about water. I know a lot of people think, well, I've got, a well, I've got an endless supply of water, but you have to be able to pull it from the aquifer to your home. And so just because you've got that well with the fresh spring water, it ain't going to work if you don't have power, baby.
And if you're fetching water even from a stream that you thought was pure, with the breakdown in modern sanitation,
No,
don't trust it.
no, filters will not take.
If you don't have one of those handy dandy little filters, you don't have some chlorine, you go, well, I'll boil it. Well, put the fuel together to boil it.
Or the bleach.
Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It turns into, yet again, a cascading series of problems.
Yeah, it just snowballs. And I know I've had Scott Hunt on here, and he is amazing as far as the simple pump and everything else that he does. And we have got such a plethora of a network here that we've known for years, you included, and just so many talented people. And what do you think some of the bigger mistakes are that the everyday prepper makes or the traps that, we fall into?
I tend to focus more on the mistakes the rest of the country's making, but yes, even within the prepping community, the ones I really like are the ones that expand their thinking to, it's not just about me, it's about my neighbors, it's about my friends.
Yes.
I do present it. Okay, here's one I often do in speeches, particularly if I'm talking to military. And I actually presented this at the War College at Carlisle a couple years back, this question. You're a base commander. Your MPs call you 7 days into the event and say, sir, we got a couple thousand civilians outside the gate. Would you please come down? You go down the gate, they're not rioting. They're holding up their children. and they're saying, you take my child, I'll walk away.
Mm.
Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, and all you colonels and generals, are you prepared to turn your military base into a vast nursery, perhaps taking care of several thousand children? Well, that's not our mission. Da, da, da. And I'm like, for heaven's sake, you're an American, whether you are of faith or not. You're going to turn your neighbor's children away? I've actually had people break down in tears just talking about it. And then I point out, where did I get this example from? When the Jews were being rounded up,
Mm-hmm.
and we're not talking about the very beginning, we're talking about a bit later, when people knew what their fate was going to be, and they're being herded to the train stations, more than a few would hold their child up, looking at their Gentile neighbor and say, please, take my baby, and I'll just keep going.
Mm. That is
How
just
many people?
heartbreaking.
How many people turn their backs?
Yeah. Yeah. If I don't look, it doesn't exist. I'll just keep moving.
Right, right. In our prepping efforts, we got to keep expanding our horizon. Would any of us be able to turn our neighbor's children away? And suddenly it's like, well, I had 2 years supply, but now I'm down to 6 months. Where do I make my dividing line?
Exactly. Where's that line drawn where you can only do so much?
Yeah.
Especially if I talk about that pebble in the water and the rings, and you deal with your family or your immediate family and your neighbors and your community and your country. And this is how vast it becomes. But yeah, at some point, especially those that you've been trying to get on board that have said, I don't have to, I'm just coming to your house. No, you have got to be responsible and take care of your own family. And I think one of the biggest concerns I find within the prepping community now, especially now that we have a different president, and whether somebody likes the president we have now or not, is complacency. And they're like, I've done enough. I'm good now. We all have to continue to learn and share.
People that I know, excuse me, people that I know who are actually in the business, doing workshops, selling supplies, things like that. Talking with them back at the beginning of this year, with the election of the current president, everything went right off the cliff. We don't have to prep anymore. And I was responding, no, you have to prep more.
Absolutely.
The can has been kicked down the road for 20 years on a number of issues. He's not going to be able to kick it any further. And I'm not saying he is aggressively going to want to go to a war, but I am saying he does have to face the reality, as we all do. The probability is higher now than it was during the days of appeasement.
I agree 100%.
Good example would be England, 1937, 38, 39. Neville Chamberlain, the archetype of the appeaser. All I'm saying is give peace a chance. I hate that song, by the way. And what was the probability of war during those years with Neville Chamberlain? Actually rather low, because he kept backing up, until finally, with his back to the wall, Hitler keeps moving. Winston Churchill, in contrast, is speaking up, saying, this is going to be bad. There's going to be a war. What was the reaction towards Winston Churchill? Shut up. Winston Churchill was a very unpopular person in England in the late 30s. But then when it finally hit the fan, and England's losing the war on May 10th, 1940, Churchill became prime minister and issued that ringing challenge that we will never surrender. I see parallels to that we should not be complacent now. In fact, we should gird ourselves for the fact it's getting pretty close to a possible reality.
Absolutely. And I've noticed with the Thrive, the freeze-dried food that I sell, I still have a couple that have bought for years, and those are primarily the ones that use it on a daily basis like I do. But I've seen the demographics completely shift in that now. And people, of the 800 people that I've met and I email to on a monthly basis, people that I have not heard from in years or ever made a purchase, they are now starting to. And so I think people have decided whether, like I said, whether they like number 44 or not. or 45, I'm sorry, number 45 or not, that yes, there are definitely things that we all need to be preparing for. And like you said, number 45 has a lot to deal with from the last 20 years. So,
Yes.
and with that, what kind of advice would you give to the novice prepper that's just getting started?
Oh, I get asked that one a lot, and I'm glad you're putting it out there. You present to somebody, let's say I give a talk,
Mhm.
and somebody comes up to me and goes, wow, okay, I got to prep. But I just went back over to where they're selling all this stuff. I'm like, how much money is this going to take? And a year's supply. I said, no, start with a week.
Mhm.
Just get that first weekend. You
Mhm.
don't even have to necessarily buy, what's designed specifically for prepping. It's time to go to the market, get a half dozen extra the cheapy cans of soup, or freeze-dried soup or whatever. One thing you really should buy right up front for 25, 30 bucks, a water filter.
Yep.
That you pour water in one side and it's drinkable the other side. Okay, now that you got a week down, how about 2 weeks? Start just factoring this into your budget a little bit at a time.
Mhm.
That will very quickly turn to a month, and then 2 months, and you keep expanding it out. It
Absolutely.
doesn't take all that much.
Mhm.
And in fact, so many of the items that are out there now on a meal per meal basis are cheaper than going to McDonald's.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what I
Yeah.
teach people is baby steps. Don't be overwhelmed.
Right.
A little extra, just baby steps.
And then also, if you're on medication,
Mhm.
legally, I have to keep saying legally, try to maximize your supply.
Mhm.
Talk to your doctor if you can get a 3, 4, 5 month supply in. And then as you're bringing in one side, the stuff that you've had for 4 or 5 months is what you're taking. Keep expanding that out.
Mhm.
Never let that jar, that pill container, get down to only 2 days left. And you call the
Right.
pharmacy up. Here's my number. I'll come down in 30 minutes. Oh, the FedEx truck is pulling up now. We got it for you.
Mhm. Yeah, FIFO, first in, first out.
And then finally, start studying a little bit. Learn basic first aid. I mean, just even Boy Scout level first aid.
Mhm.
Things like that.
Mhm.
These are very, very simple no-brainers.
Absolutely. And that's why I love doing the shows that we do together with, Heritage Life Skills with Carolina Readiness and Prepper Camp. And these are all things that we've been involved with for years. And this is where you learn. So daily skills, because like you said, our society is so inept at all of these things and they have no clue.
Mm-hmm.
So they go to the doctor, or they now have the doc in the box. You just go to CVS, or you can even just jump on your computer. You don't even need to go anywhere.
Yeah.
And we have just become so lazy as a society and just expect everything to be handed to us. And it's not going to be like that.
Good example. This was during Sandy, so this is 5 years ago. I paid particular attention to Sandy because that hit where I grew up. My mother used to joke that she grew up looking at the backside of the Statue of Liberty. And, I mean, I was only 10, 11 miles outside of New York City. Okay, it hits. Everything is bad. A couple of days later, Diane Sawyer, they're going into this woman's house, and the only thing missing was the soft piano music or the violin, where the woman's in tears, and it's been 3 days, and I have no food for my kids, and I have no water, and oh my God, this is when are they going to come and fix it all? But what got me really upset was, at the very end, Diane made a point. We helped Mrs. Smith, and we delivered a 5-day food supply and 5 gallons of water. Lady, you knew 5 days before it hit it was coming.
Exactly.
You could have filled up your bathtub. Did you even think to fill your bathtub up?
Mm-hmm.
Did you even think of some of those 2-liter soda bottles you're throwing out? Fill those up.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And remember the mobs outside McDonald's, only a day or two after it happened, waving $100 bills.
Mm-hmm.
And the manager's trying to explain to them, our computers are down. We can't accept money. Remember that?
Gosh, that is, and yeah, that's another thing. Have cash,
Right.
because your little debit cards or whatever are not going to work. And
Useless.
so many people say, I never use cash anymore. Yeah, they're trying to turn us into a cashless society.
And the long lines of people that were standing with their 5-gallon gasoline cans because their generators had run out after 6 hours. The long lines to Starbucks that did have like some electricity so they could charge their phones back up. These are no-brainers.
Yes.
No-brainers that don't cost all that much to be prepared ahead of time.
I thought of another question. Somebody I used to work with, we were talking about the EMP scenario, and they were like, well, you don't have to worry about the hospitals. The hospitals are hardened and they have generators and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no, not really. And so thinking of an EMP level of type of event, what is it going to affect?
Regarding hospitals, do you recall the nightmare stories of the primary hospital in downtown New Orleans? Remember that?
No. Was this
Katrina?
during, yes, Katrina.
Where several staff actually were facing indictment for euthanizing patients. And then it was quietly pushed over. Look it up. Because they had a total power shutdown. Because their generators were gone as well. Because guess what? Their generators were on ground level and underwater. Horrific descriptions that it got over 100 degrees inside the hospital. That they were laboriously carrying people up 7, 8, 9 floors to the roof for a helicopter to evacuate them. And that in part of this process, they started overdosing some of the people.
Wow.
The nursing home that was found with 50 people floating against the ceiling, all of them dead. Oh, sure, I want to believe my local hospital is prepared, but even then, they are linked to a vast infrastructure of capability, of computer capability. How much fuel do they actually have on hand to run a generator to power the whole system?
Exactly. Even if it was hardened, you still have to have the fuel to maintain and keep it going. So
Right. And then beyond that, your staff. How far do most people commute to their jobs now? 10, 20, 30 miles a day?
Probably a good 30 minutes at least, yeah. And that's driving though. If your car's not working, you can't drive.
Or even if your car might work, the highways are jammed anyhow because of the cars that didn't work. You might have the most dedicated doctors and nurses in the world. But after a day or two, it's just like, I got to get home to my kids. I got to get home to my family.
Exactly. Yeah, I have my own family to worry about.
Right. It breaks down.
Yeah, it does. And so what else have you had coming up besides the 1 Second Ever? I know we've always been praying for a movie to come out. Is that ever going to happen?
There are contracts literally moving through the vast computer system, even as you and I talk.
Yay! So there may actually be a movie one day.
I can't discuss it yet.
Maybe.
I'm on a confidentiality thing. Whoever's involved in this puts out the press release.
Yes. Oh, gosh. That's awesome. So what other books have you been working on and coming up with after this? Tell us about some of the other books that you've written.
I don't want to sound super mysterious, cryptic, but I am working on another book. But it's kind of like a time-sensitive idea, so I'm not going to discuss it.
Okay, but no, I'm sorry, going back to what has come out.
Oh, what has come out?
1 second after this.
A book I really enjoyed writing was in cooperation with NASA that came out 4 years ago, titled Pillar to the Sky. NASA, through my publisher, recruited me. I wrote this like 170,000 word novel about building space elevators.
Wow.
I had a blast. I was up at Goddard meeting some real experts. Unfortunately, the book didn't do too well. There was a reviewer on Amazon who, I think reviewer number 99 for the book said, this book sucks. Forstchen should stick to doom and gloom.
Oh my gosh.
And my reaction was, like Michael Corleone in The Godfather, every time I try to get out, they pull me back in again.
Well, you are the godfather of prepping, as we at least in our little circle of network have called you for years. So
It's I've done the 3 books now on EMP.
Mhm.
1 second after, 1 year after, and Final Day.
Mhm.
My next book is somehow kind of parenthetically related to it, but we're not going to talk about
No, no, that'll be for
that.
the.
Prior to that, I did a lot of books on history, the American Civil War. My doctoral dissertation was on an African American regiment from Indiana that was wiped out at the Battle of the Crater,
Mhm.
July 1864. That I turned into a YA novel, which won a nice little award from New York City Library System, and also turned into a mainstream novel. Going all the way back to where I started off in writing short stories and science fiction for Boys Life magazine 30 years ago.
Mm.
So maybe some of your listeners that are now in their 40s and 50s maybe read me as a kid
Mhm.
in Boys Life magazine, where I was published about every 9 to 12 months.
Wow, that's neat. That's something I did not know.
So there's been about 50 books in my life.
Wow. Well, you are just so amazing and so talented, and I love your books.
Thank you.
And anything else you want to add in?
Well, since we're talking about the Boy Scouts, what's the Boy Scout motto?
Be
Be
prepared.
prepared.
Which is cool as a Boy Scout, but we've learned as adults, people start looking at us like we have a third eye. But hey, you got to take care of your family. You got to take care of your neighbors, and you got to take care of your community.
Yes, that's why I wrote the books.
Absolutely. Well, we have had the wonderful privilege of being with Dr. Bill Forstchen today. And Bill, as always, it's been a pleasure, and love to you and the family. And I look forward to seeing you guys probably in April at Heritage Life Skills or something at some point. So
The pleasure. Thank you very much for a
thank
great
you.
interview. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Have a great day.
You too.